My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this event where we're going to be hearing shortly from Benny Begin, Dr. Benny Begin. Before I introduce him, just important, necessary, unfortunately, piece of housekeeping, which is should we hear a siren during the course of this evening, we will go downstairs one floor to the auditorium, which is our safe room, our protected room. So you'll hear even if you don't hear, in the unlikely event that you don't hear the siren itself, you'll hear over the intercom, our security guy will tell us to all go downstairs. Okay. Those of you watching from outside Israel, this is what we're dealing with right now. Okay. So in a few days, actually this Wednesday, the 26th of March, is the anniversary of the signing of the Israel-Egypt peace agreement, March 26, 1979. That, of course, was preceded by the Camp David summit in September of 1978, hosted by President Carter, bringing together Menachem Begin, Prime Minister of Israel, and Anwar Sadat, President of Egypt, for what would be a historic first peace agreement between Israel and an Arab state. And I think because of the recent passing of President Carter, there's been a lot about his role in the success of those talks. If you want to read a book which challenges some of that, then I can recommend Gerald Steinberg and Ze'ev Rabinovich's book, which we at the Begin Center helped produce, which talks a lot about Menachem Begin's role in the success of those talks. But we're going to be hearing about Begin's contribution to the success of the talks, and particularly from the perspective of his long-standing principles and worldview, which he held from his days back as leader of the Irgun, all the way through the years in the opposition and then as Prime Minister, and how those played out in the peace talks. And we're going to be hearing about that from someone who I think is probably more qualified than anyone else to talk about that, someone who knew the man better than anyone else we could have found, which is, of course, his son, Ze'ev Binyamin Begin, best known to his friends as Benny Begin. I'll just briefly introduce him. Benny Begin was first elected to the Knesset in 1988 for the Likud. He served as Minister of Science, Minister with that portfolio. He left politics in 2013 and then returned for one last Knesset term from 2021 to 2022, this time with the New Hope Party. He has a doctorate in geology from Colorado State University and head of the Geological Survey of Israel from 2005 to 2008. He's published 3 books and many articles, and he is a constant resource for us.
I'm impressed.
At the Begin Center. It's all online, Benny. It's all online.
Thank you, Paul, for this introduction. Sometimes they are longer, so this is very nice. So the topic is already known to you. I'm a little cold, I'm sorry. Can we extinguish this? איפה? רגע, אנחנו מקליטים את זה בשבילנו?
כן.
אז אפשר פה לכבות אחד, או פעם שעברה זה לא הלך?
זה לא בטוח שזה יעבוד טוב.
אוקיי. בסדר, אם רואים. These are some of the huts, buildings, and at the Camp David Resort. And our topic tonight is Menachem Begin's beliefs as tested in the Camp David Accords. A lot of this material was new to me up to about a year or two ago, and some of it even 3-4 months ago, but when you break it and you read it, I think I could see things that at least I couldn't see before. In 1946, here is Menachem Begin disguised during in that time being the commander of the Irgun. He wrote a letter to a friend in the United States. There was some argument between them, between two groups there, and he wrote, we're not dogmatists of formulas, we're uncompromising advocates of principles. What are principles? The principle, I looked at the Oxford Dictionary, a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as a foundation for a system of belief or behavior. Question is, just for the discussion, are the Camp David Accords consistent with Begin's principles? If yes, all right. If not, to what degree? So that's what we will discuss tonight. This is just a copy of the Cherut newspaper. It was the Cherut Party's daily, started as the wallpaper of the Irgun, and then they inherited it. And what you see here is the emblem לשלמות המולדת, לקיבוץ גלויות, לצדק סוציאלי, לחירות האדם. 4 principles. To the integrity of the whole land, to the gathering of the Jews, to social justice, to the freedom of man. All of them nice. And combined together, we may refer to them as representing a national, I didn't extinguish it, as the national liberal worldview. In the national liberal worldview, things are not easier for those who carry it, because you have to balance constantly between human rights on one hand and the needs of the nation on the other hand, and on many occasions they do conflict. You can think about yourself, even the local interests of the municipality sometimes infringe upon our human rights, our right to property, etc. And as a result, if I may say so, of this need for constant balance, Begin always searched by compromise. And when he reached a conclusion, he used to sigh a little bit and say, okay, I can live with it. But it took some time and some intellectual effort to reach that point. Begin served for 40 years as chairman, and chairpersons need to compromise, need to reach compromise between conflicting views of their colleagues in whatever body. He was commander of the Irgun. Resolutions there were taken by majority vote or by majority, in most cases unanimously. And in the same 1946 letter, he also wrote, I never issue a command, although they call me commander. That was his way, that was his approach to life, and that was his basic belief that people, and of course his colleagues, are equal, and there is no superiority for anyone in his intellectual capabilities. So for 40 years he was chairman, commander of the Irgun, chairman of the Cherut Party, chairman of the Cherut Liberal Bloc, chairman of the Likud Party, prime minister. 40 years of public service, and compromising was a habit of his. So we start at what I call stage 1, it's a rather long one, 48 to 1977. What we'll try to discern there some of the roots that led later to the Camp David Accords. In May 1948, emerging from the underground, Begin delivered a speech then still in the secret radio station of the Irgun, and within that, it's about half an hour of recording. He quoted from Ze'ev Jabotinsky's poem of 1929, "There shall thrive with abundance and joy the Arab, the Christian, the Jew, as my flag, so honest and pure, purifies my Jordan's both banks." How's that? Okay?
We had a back and forth about the president.
Yeah, we had we exchanged advice on that. I think I found a balance. Okay. My flag, so honest and pure, purifies my Jordan's both banks. Which banks did he refer to, and what was the extent on each bank? He proceeded, "The homeland is a historic and geographic whole. The day shall come in which we shall plow the fields of the Gilead." Where is that? This is a map of the Palestine as mandated to the British government in 1920. And on the eastern part, in Transjordan, what you can easily discern, but not here, the area in close proximity, say no more than 40, 50 kilometers east of the Jordan River, that area is fertile, a lot of rain, somewhat similar to Samaria and to Judea from the point of view of rainfall. All the rest is desert. That fertile part of Transjordan has been called since biblical times, since our forefathers, the Gilead. And 3 of our tribes, or 2.5 of the Israeli tribes, thrived there in those days. It is quite interesting to know that in 1919, the World Zionist Organization proposed a claim to the League of Nations, and this is the map. And what you see, one, if you look at the northern part, it does include the southern part of Lebanon. They said we will need the water, but also the Gilead, because we would need, for millions of Jews, we would need fertile lands to cultivate. And that was the map that they annexed to their report. This map was actually used by the Zionist movement. It was kosher from the point of view of the Zionist movement for years, and you see it here on the pushke, on the JNF box, in which even when I was 6 and 7 years old, we would each Friday come with a nickel, no, actually with a cent equivalent, with a mil, not even a grush, a mil, to our class. I'll show now I'll take off for a minute, and I'll show the path of the Polish army from Uzbekistan in the southern USSR to Eretz Israel back in 1942, the army or the division to which Menachem Begin joined in order to reach Eretz Israel. This was the path, crossing the Caspian Sea, Iran, Iraq, and Eretz Israel. And he came with them. So he arrived at Eretz Israel and at Western Eretz Israel from the east. And this is what he wrote about it in his book, The Revolt, 1950. And there is Transjordan, our land, fields as wide as the sea, the smell of the field, the smell of the homeland field. Let's note, he came through Iraq, through Transjordan. They crossed with this convoy 300 or 400 kilometers, and he didn't exclaim, "These are the fields of the homeland," only when he reached the Gilead. Here are the fields, the smell of the homeland. But then in 1938, Jabotinsky testified before the Peel Committee, who then issued their horrible report with the first partition plan. And there Jabotinsky noted or explained to the forum, to the notables, the term Palestine, when I employ it, will mean the area on both sides of the Jordan, the area mentioned in the original Palestine mandate. In that sense, in that opportunity, he extended the meaning of Eretz Israel, or the meaning of Palestine, to include all that area, and he explained it by the need to host in our country millions of Jews who are in trouble, especially in Europe. So that was on March 38, and then lo and behold, somehow in November 38, in the weekly Betar revisionist organ, Jerusalem Liberated, in Polish, the young lady who was in charge, who was the editor, she was the writer, she was everything. She initiated it. She was very active, and she printed that map. You see both sides. You see that she invented a gun and a probably Jewish hand holding it, and she added the slogan in Polish, "Tylko tak," only thus. And almost immediately, that emblem, that symbol, was adopted by Irgun members of the time in Eretz Israel. So you see the similarity, and you see the slogan in Hebrew, "Rak kach," only thus. I'm not sure that Menachem Begin, when he came, he was a little disconnected, detached from the events when he was first isolated in Vilna after the war, the World War II erupted, and then he was imprisoned, then he was sent to Siberia for a short period, and it took him time. But he obviously adopted that symbol, at least partly because the Charut party presented itself as the heir, political heir of the Irgun in those days. You see here, within the campaign of the Charut party in the first elections, you see Menachem Begin, by his side sitting is Chaim Landau, and you see the poster, Moledet v'Cherut, homeland, freedom, and it still persisted also in 1956. And this is the small pin that people wore in the Fourth National Convention of the Charut Party, the same symbol. How about the Sinai? Well, the Sinai was not included by the British or by the League of Nations. It was not requested by the British when they filed their request to the League of Nations. But in during the Sinai campaign, October 1956, you see the arrows showing the progress of the Israeli army deep into the Sinai and deep south to the tip of the Sinai Peninsula until they reached a point called Shah HaMashiach. And there we see here in the picture Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan in Shah HaMashiach, and he delivered a fiery speech, and not there, but Prime Minister Ben-Gurion even declared the establishment of the Third Kingdom of Israel. But very soon, it took several weeks, Israel was forced to withdraw from the whole of Sinai and from the Gaza Strip without any gain. To that, many people crossing the across the political aisle objected to. And I think it has some interest to note that in November 56, that is the next month, when that threat of withdrawal with no gain was hovering above them, that's what he said in a speech in Tel Aviv: the territories outside the land of Israel that were conquered with the blood of our sons, their fate shall be determined by international law. Note, territories, the Sinai, outside of the land of Israel. It is not included in the land of Israel as they interpreted it, or even as the British interpreted it. And he continued, their fate can only be determined in one place, at the table, discussing peace between us and the Egyptians, as we said from the first moment of the beginning of the Sinai operation. We do not want eternal war. Our whole aspiration is for peace. At the peace negotiating table, the fate of these territories will be determined. So if you want to see the seeds of the agreement as achieved 20 years later, I think we can see it here rather quickly. Both the usage of the international law terminology and the proposition that the Sinai is not a part of Eretz Israel, and then the quest for peace with our neighbors. Now we turn to another development, and that's 9 years later. Begin sought an agreement with the General Zionist Party and the Liberal Party during the 50s, but his requests were not heeded, and he had to wait several years. Then he proposed it again to the Liberal Party, but they refused to include in the platform the belief of the Herut Party in the integrity of the land of Israel. And so, after a lot of negotiations, if not haggling, he found a solution, and he proposed a compromise. The compromise wording said, the Herut movement will continue, I add, meaning only the Herut movement will continue to publicly espouse the principle of the integrity of the homeland, namely the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel in its historical integrity as an internal, inalienable right. So only Herut would carry it. The liberals are free to it. There was only 2 years before the 6 Days War, but they still held that view, and we can say that the basis of the compromise was this: we do not try to impose our principles on you. Please, guys, do not try to impose your principles on us. We found a way, and it worked. Now we have to note that since 1946 it was the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan that has been the recognized sovereign in Jordan, handed over to the Hashemites by the British in Churchill's white paper in 1922. It was internationally accepted, and it was rather clear in later years that the Harut Party's aspirations for Transjordan could not actually be realized. And in 1981, Begin presented openly a substitute, a vision. That was at the annual memorial to Ze'ev Jabotinsky 100 years after he was born, and that's what he said there. We believe that a day shall come in which the two parts of Eretz Israel shall peacefully build agreement and understanding, a nation's alliance, a free confederation for cooperation between them. And then he said, then things shall be realized. And he again quoted from Jabotinsky's Left of the Jordan, there shall thrive with abundance and joy the Arab, the Christian, the Jew, as my flag so honest and pure purifies my Jordan's both banks, but now in a different setting, as a part of a confederation with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, not realized yet, although we enjoy a peace treaty with Jordan for more than 30 years, but that change has to be noted. Then we arrive at June 1967, the 6 Days War, and a few days after it, no, before it, Begin was nominated Minister without Portfolio in the National Unity Cabinet, headed by Prime Minister Levi Eshkol. This map shows the ceasefire lines, okay, all the lines in which the yellow part is included, ceasefire lines at the end of the war, June 10, 1967, 6 days. And you see here two things. That's a visit by Prime Minister Eshkol and Menachem Begin in the white shirt. He didn't want to disguise as a military person. Photo taken with some soldiers there. But I think you can also assume or deduce from that picture that he had quite good, even warm relations with the Prime Minister, who proposed to him that he asked him to accompany him to that official visit. A week after the end of the war, June 19th, a secret cabinet resolution was taken, and Begin was a member of the wording committee, and it says, Israel proposes peace treaties with Egypt and Syria, including security arrangements based on the international border and Israel's security needs. And the international borders, both in the Sinai and a little below the Golan, were well known at the time. It's not the ceasefire lines that were achieved after the in 1949. The Syrians encroached a little bit towards the Kinneret. But anyway, it was held in secrecy. But please note this resolution talks about Syria and about Egypt, and Judea and Samaria are not mentioned, and not the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. And I think it is typical to see the influence of Menachem Begin on the wording of cabinet resolutions in those times. Please note that at that time, the first stage of the unity government, there were only 2 members of the Charut Liberal bloc among 21 ministers. So he didn't have even it was almost a slim minority. However, he had his own influence because people recognized A, that he is a person of integrity, B, that he has his ways with compromises. And to demonstrate that, you see here a note. I translated it here. Mr. Begin, that's the way the Mapai people used to call him all those years. Since you are an artist of wording, Aman Hanisuach, please formulate a proposal for a cabinet resolution concerning Israel's position on the issue of the West Bank so that we vote for it. Moshe Dayan, he was then the prominent Minister of Defense, and he asked him for his advice in order to the cabinet to vote for whatever wording he suggested. So we proceed with that cabinet, and still in June, Menachem Begin proposed a decision to extend the sovereignty of the State of Israel to the whole area up to the Jordan River. And in August of that year, he again proposed, I think that a resolution is needed, in my opinion, a very urgent one, and the resolution I propose to adopt is all West Eretz Israel under our sovereignty. He did not put it to a vote. He knew that he doesn't have the votes, doesn't have the hands, and he didn't want his cabinet to reject it. So he tabled it, but they didn't vote about it. And then, in the same meeting, he said the following, which will accompany us later in Camp David. Had there been established an autonomous region, which was proposed by some ministers at the time, with a parliament, and you cannot imagine an autonomous region without a parliament, one can expect a declaration of secession or a declaration of full independence. Of course, the draft resolution talked about autonomy to an area, as I said, autonomous region. To this he rejected vehemently. We'll see it again arising. And in December 1969, now after the passing away of the excellent, clever and wise Prime Minister Eshkol, a new cabinet had to be formed, this time led by Prime Minister Golda Meir, and they reiterated the same formulation, and as far as my recollection goes, it was to a large extent formulated, proposed by Menachem Begin. In the absence of peace treaties, Israel shall continue to fully maintain the situation as determined through the ceasefire. And he held it for some years, and the cabinet held it for some years, until some other ministers changed their mind. So what you see here in the picture, you see Mr. Meir's cabinet, Mr. Meir on the left, Menachem Begin here on the right. And maybe you'll wonder that in December 1969, and you'll see the fingerprints of Menachem Begin here. In the basic lines, Kavei Yesod of the National Unity Cabinet, Chapter 4, Main Tasks, Paragraph 4, Chapter A, Main Task, Para 4, increasing the establishment of security settlements and permanent communities, rural as well as urban, on the soil of the homeland. The cabinet is full of Labour Party people and even Mapam people, a little bit leaning more to the left than Mapai at the time, and this is, I think, quite impressive that they agreed to use this terminology and include it within the basic operational lines for the next cabinet. And then in June 1976, the unity government disintegrated because Menachem Begin did not agree to withdraw from parts of the Sinai without a peace treaty. He was then a leader of the opposition, so he proposed the Knesset revolution, and with two paragraph A, the Knesset favors direct negotiations between Israel and its neighbors without prior conditions by any side, meaning without prior conditions set for the outcome of the negotiations. They used to say, you want us around the table? Promise us, commit yourself to A, B, C, and D, usually total withdrawal, etc., etc. That's the operational meaning of negotiations without prior conditions, aimed at the signing of peace treaties between them. B, the Knesset resolves again because it was already resolved by the cabinet at the time, to promote the establishment of security settlements and permanent communities, both rural and urban, on the soil of the homeland. Actually copied it from that resolution back here in 1976. Then in January 1977, that's 4 months before the elections, was not yet a prime minister and took ill at the time. That's what he drafted, calling up the Arab countries to enter into negotiations on the signing of peace treaties with us. You see the recurring theme. And there shall be no foreign rule in Eretz Israel. Now when he refers to Eretz Israel, he refers already only to its western part, because there is no meaning to apply to the eastern part. This is, you should note, is a minimal proposition. It's a little remote from the proposition to extend Israeli sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. This is more modest than that. There shall be no foreign rule in Eretz Israel. And then May 1977, the Likud wins the elections, and in his speech, in one of the last parts, he said, I would like to also thank my 8 grandchildren who wrote that they are also for Begin because he's a good grandpa, who Sabatov, and we shall return to it at the end of the lecture. So now we arrive at stage 2. Menachem Begin sits on his throne as prime minister. Can you say throne? It sounds royal. Okay, I didn't mean that. But he's firm as prime minister, and now we'll see what happened then. Now the basic lines of the Begin government June 20. The Jewish people has an internal, inalienable historic right to Eretz Israel, the land of our forefathers. The cabinet shall plan, establish and promote rural and urban settlements on the homeland's land. You remember it already, you recognize it. It starts with the Golda Meir's cabinet, but then because he had almost a patent for that wording and he used it. Let us note that back in that time only several thousand Jews resided in Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, and today there's about 500,000. So something happened since with the application of that right. Again, from the basic lines, the cabinet's authority to apply through a decree, he quotes from the law that was adopted by the Knesset in June 1967 in order to extend Israel's sovereignty over parts of Jerusalem. The cabinet's authority to apply through a decree the law, jurisdiction and administration on any part of Eretz Israel that shall be stipulated in the decree, that's a quotation from the law, but then a reservation. That authority shall not be applied as long as the negotiations on peace treaties between Israel and its neighbors take place. You see preparation. You see that this is the next stages in his thoughts already. And so almost as soon as the cabinet was established on June 20th, on July 4th in 1977, United States Independence Day, Begin asked before that to meet there with the Romanian ambassador to Israel. Everyone gathers in this grand meeting annually. And the ambassador was presented to him, and the Prime Minister asked the ambassador to set a meeting with Romanian President Ceausescu. Why, of all other leaders, would he ask to meet with President Ceausescu? President Ceausescu, as you know, was maybe not one of the most pleasing personalities, but he had an advantage from the Israeli point of view, from the point of view of the goal pursued by Prime Minister Begin. He actually, excuse me, defected from the Soviet bloc and played an independent role. He was in good relations with Arab leaders. He was, God forbid, also in excellent relations with Yasser Arafat. But that's parenthetically. So Menachem Begin found it fit to ask to meet with him in order to proceed with his plan. So let's look at the timetable, and you'll see that it is rather quick. 77, June 20th, confidence in Begin's cabinet. July 4th, requests a meeting with Ceausescu. July 19, Begin-Carter first meeting. August 27, Begin-Ceausescu meeting. September 4th, Ceausescu informs Begin Sadat is ready for meetings, but not between the leaders, but between emissaries. Good enough for a start. And in September 16, Foreign Minister Dayan, then already Foreign Minister, and Mr. Sadat's, President Sadat's confidant, Hassan Touhami, met for their first meeting in Morocco. They had a second one, and I'll have to correct those who remember something from the claims that were made. He never promised in advance to Sadat or to Hami, etc., that Egypt will regain the whole of the Sinai Peninsula, which was the end result of the negotiations, but not at that time. And then November 19 already, and Sadat arrives in his momentous, historic visit to Jerusalem. You'll find in history books or in the internet, you'll find you will find that negotiations for peace in the Middle East started in the bottom line. But as you saw, it is an incorrect reading of the facts as we know, and I think many people know, but some of them disregard. In September 1977, an important development took place. The United States diplomacy, which played for a long time with a vague terminology, peace agreements through the Geneva Convention, convening all rivals together, and of course had to expect that nothing could come out of such parley. But then they changed their mind or their approach, and they adopted the concept, as you now well know, peace treaties and not peace agreements. Peace treaties are well defined in international law and in the tradition of international diplomacy. But they asked the Israeli government to do the following. All right, we agree to that, but now could you show us some drafts of what you think would be suitable wordings of peace treaties with Egypt and with Jordan? And I think it is significant that in the draft treaty with Jordan, what it says, he repeated the same wording, modest wording I should say. No part of the area shall be relinquished to foreign rule. And you remember that from some previous expressions. So then came President Sadat in his historic, really historic and bold, courageous visit to Israel. And then the dilemma arose clearly. On one hand, Begin's desire for a separate peace treaty with Egypt, which of course at that time the Egyptians, from their point of view, couldn't agree to, because they felt that they had some commitment to the Arabs in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and then to others. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, Begin's commitment to Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Can they be reconciled? That was the great and grave question before him that had to be resolved, and he looked for it, meaning he searched for it in his head, and it was quite a fertile head, as we know. And on November 30th of that year, Begin formulated his first draft proposal of the plan for self-rule, autonomy for the Arab inhabitants in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. I underline inhabitants and not the area, as we saw his objection when autonomy to the area was proposed in the Israeli cabinet some 10 years beforehand. This is in his handwriting, not the first, I think, one of the first drafts that he proposed, and just read the first two articles. the Palestinian Arabs, inhabitants of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza district, Arabs, inhabitants, will enjoy full autonomy. For this purpose, a self-governing authority, administrative council, meaning not a legislative council, shall be elected by the Arab inhabitants of Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza district. This is the gist of it, but then there's some dozen, maybe 20 or 30 articles. The main points of Begin's plan for autonomy, which looked at the time, in some respects, looks now far-fetched. In Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, an administrative self-rule autonomy shall be established by the Arab inhabitants and for them. Security and public order in the areas of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza shall be vested with Israel's authorities. The inhabitants of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, irrespective of citizenship or lacking citizenship, are given, quite far-reaching, the free choice to accept Israeli or Jordanian citizenship. Please note, this is not a peace treaty. This is only with the local inhabitants or with Jordan. This is under the umbrella of an autonomy, and still he was bold enough to propose it, but then should be admitted it vanished with time and evaporated this way or the others. I'll open parentheses and try to give you a more realistic and practical picture of the meaning of the first article here. Security and public order in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza shall be vested with Israel's authorities. And when there was an attempt back in 1993 to depart from that and to give away to the PLO parts of Judea and Samaria and the whole of Gaza, in order for them to be responsible for security, the results, as you know, were terrible. And when people told me at the time, what is it? Our Oslo plan is totally comparable or even equal to the Oslo agreement, and they used to prick me, thought that they prick me, it's your fathers. But no, you can see the difference, and the difference was translated to the death of more than 1,000 Jews, even close to 2,000 in about 10 years. So now you know the difference and why he insisted years before that on that clause. Now, and Begin, according to his habit, was sharing with his cabinet, if not all, then most of the diplomatic developments. And that's what he said in 1977 when he presented his peace plan to his colleagues. You see here on the left Yehuda Ben Meir, who passed away last week. Good man, well intended and smart. I met him several times later. Okay, that happens. I think it was 85. So he says, that's a quotation. Article 24 of the peace plan says, Israel stands on its right and claim for sovereignty over Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza district. But, knowing that there are additional claims, it proposes, for the sake of a peace agreement, to leave the issue of sovereignty open. That's the first time you could see it openly and bluntly for people to understand, to agree or disagree. But you see the direction he takes in order to make a peace treaty available and feasible. And he continued, there are other claims, and we want an agreement that shall serve as a basis for a peace treaty. And he foresaw the agreement, the Camp David agreement. It was not declared yet. And following the Camp David agreement, a peace treaty. And since there are other claims, and hence, in order to reach an agreement, we propose that the question of sovereignty shall remain open, and that is how it shall be. You see the plan taking some flesh and some bones. November 19, as we saw, Sadat's visit to Jerusalem. December 15, Begin Carter's second meeting. December 26, on a reciprocity basis, Begin and Sadat met in Alexandria. On December 28, Begin presented his peace plan in the cabinet and then in the Knesset, all in the open. It was marching on, but it was followed by 8 months of totally futile negotiations between the Israeli and Egyptian delegations. So then President Carter and his aides stepped in. On May 1st of 1978, Begin Carter's third meeting. On August 10th, U.S. invitation to both parties to Camp David. September 5th to 17th, the Camp David folly, the result of which was a framework for peace in the Middle East. And less than 6 months later, March 26th, the peace treaty signed. All this calendar and this timetable is rather fast concerning the great difference and the great difficulties and the deep and bloody history between the two countries. So let us now reiterate and underline the fact that Menachem Begin both initiated and promoted the negotiations towards the signing of the Israel-Egypt peace treaty. How? Two new ideas that he proposed in 1977. I'm sorry, he initiated it already on June, formally with the Romanian ambassador in June of 1977, and two new ideas that he presented paved the way to the Camp David Accords in 1978, followed by the peace treaty in 1979, which were those two original ideas. A, deferring the decision on sovereignty in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. B, proposing self-rule, autonomy for the Arab inhabitants there. It was never proposed beforehand, and without these, as you might remember, nothing could come out of those negotiations. So now we arrive at the Camp David resort, the presidential resort, I think, since President Eisenhower's time. David was, or is, Dwight Eisenhower, General Eisenhower's grandson. So here we are. And somehow I found on the internet several months ago the following. There's in the State Department, if they don't abolish it now for the sake of savings. There's an office of the historian. The very title is very impressive. And they published last year, Foreign Relations of the United States, 77 to 80, Volume 4, National Security Policy. This is the volume, it's 2024. And it includes the following. I didn't know that, at least. That in September 78, in Camp David, before the arrival of President Sadat and Prime Minister Begin, President Carter took for himself several dozens of personal notes, and they published them. About maybe 30, 40, I don't know, but I extracted the relevant ones for us tonight. 242, basis of negotiations on all fronts. End military government in West Bank. No new settlements. When you look at it in red, the agreement finally mentions peace treaties based on Security Council Resolution 242 and 338 in all the parts and not on all fronts, which was very itchy for Menachem Begin because he didn't want to commit himself to an agreement with Egypt about Syria and of course about Judea and Samaria and Gaza. And military government in West Bank, not included in the agreement. No new settlements, not included in the agreement. But now, lo and behold, 3 more points by President Carter. Leave West Bank sovereignty open 5 years. Give credit to Begin Home Rule Plan 5 years. No independent Palestinian state. Long-term Israeli security presence on West Bank, which is actually adopted directly from the so-called Begin's plan, and it was a good introduction to the end result, although it was still difficult to close all ends. So here's the Israeli delegation at Camp David. I wouldn't present to you all these gentlemen. They consulted daily or twice a day, very openly, and the discussion was open. And on day 1 of the parley, Begin informed the members of the Israeli delegation that in his meeting with the presidents of the United States and Egypt, he had told President Sadat the following. It's all in the minutes taken by Eli Rubinstein, I think. Okay. The same applies, he said, the same applies to Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, which with all my heart I believe they are ours, but we do not ask you to accept it. Hence the question of sovereignty is left open. On the first day of the parley, it was one of the keys to the success of the parley, and I copied what I showed you from 1965, the basis of the compromise. We do not try to impose our principles on you. Please do not try to impose your principles on me, on us. May I say, I have some, of course, relations with the late Prime Minister, quite genius and generous, and not only clever, but wise. And it paved the way for the agreement. So in September 78, signing of the Camp David Accords, we see the 3 gentlemen, happy 3 gentlemen here, and 5 months later, signing of the peace treaty again in Washington. I think they mixed the flags, and the American flag is above. Okay. Results. There were some concessions, of course, on part of the Israeli party and of Prime Minister Menachem Begin. One, ceding the whole Sinai Peninsula to Egypt's sovereignty. The distance between the Israeli Sinai border and Egypt is about 200 kilometers. Not few kilometers in order to afford early warning, but still, this was the arrangement, the agreement. It is militarily limited in close proximity to the Suez Canal. One mechanized infantry division with no more than 230 tanks. Area B, only a border patrol, battalions of course, this could be infantry people disguised as border patrol. And in that area C, only police. This is the agreement, so it's a limited sovereignty of Egypt in the Sinai as a part of the security arrangements. Other concessions. Dismantling, it was very bitter. Dismantling all Israeli communities in the Sinai. Inclusion of the UN Security Council resolution in all its parts, which was actually almost rejected, or at least despite the liking of Prime Minister Begin. Inclusion of the expression, the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people and their just requirements. They invented a formal way out of it. Later, Chief Justice Aaron Barak was very creative in that sense, but we'll proceed. And then there were some articles in which you could see both concessions, but advantage in the same time. The negotiations among Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and the representatives of the inhabitants of the West Bank and Gaza to agree on the final status of the West Bank and Gaza. Of course, under such arrangement, it prevents the application of Israeli sovereignty in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza unless you get, not naturally, without the consent of the partners. But what is the advantage? It also prevents the application of foreign sovereignty without the consent of Israel. So you could hold it both ways. Let's see how Menachem Begin viewed it and explained it in the cabinet, in the basic lines of his next cabinet, openly, 1987, Article 7.
81.
The autonomy, as agreed in Camp David, is neither sovereignty nor self-determination. The autonomy arrangements, as determined in Camp David, are the guarantee that under no conditions shall an independent Palestinian state be established in the areas of Western Eretz Israel. That's the way he looked at it, and in hindsight, I think that he was not wrong. Now the agreement includes some omissions. The agreement does not mention Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. Not mentioned at all. Advantage, it enables the practical application of the Jewish historical right to the land through settlement, through the establishment of communities, both rural and urban, as discussed before that. The agreement does not mention the source of authority in Judea and Samaria during the autonomy period and later, and that implies that the authority, of course, is vested in Israel who has the upper hand. Overt advantages, a separate peace treaty with Egypt with no linkage to Judea, Samaria and Gaza, and security arrangements in the Sinai Peninsula. B, the IDF shall remain in Judea, Samaria and Gaza for the 5-year period and beyond. So let's summarize it. It won't take too long now. It was Begin who initiated the peace treaty immediately after becoming prime minister, and he actively pursued it. Israel's positions, as expressed in the agreements, are rooted in Begin's political thought as developed over 3 decades of his public service. The negotiations entailed, actually, in hindsight, the distilling of Begin's positions until touching his deeper political core, which is there shall be no foreign rule west of the Jordan River, the Jewish national right to Judea, Samaria and Gaza is applied through the establishment of Jewish communities there. So we can see in conclusion that Menachem Begin was a doer, a man of initiative, a man of action, a man of practical application of political ideas with the limitation, of course, limitations as set by reality, but pushing them to the limit. And of course, actually since early age, it was well known to have patience, and he adopted compromise as a way of life. Now I shall conclude with the following. Again, back to the Aspen hut at Camp David, and at the end of it, when they all were in good mood, Prime Minister Begin asked for a favor of the 2 leaders. He said, I have grandchildren, and could you please do me a favor and sign some photographs for them? This was the photograph, one of them. Then they signed the others. You see President Sadat, you see Jimmy Carter, and then I'll enlarge it, and you see here Jimmy Carter, to Meirav, Michal and Naama, our 3 daughters. At the time we had only 5, and the 2 young men had, received a different photo, and then the 3 daughters of my sister. And look at Menachem Begin, he signed Saba. Only Saba. That's his role in history. Jimmy Carter, Saba. Thank you.
Okay. So it's pretty late, but maybe we'll take just 1 or 2 questions if there are any. There are some. Okay. So
I'll try to be shorter in my answer.
Let's keep the questions short, and Benny will try to keep the answers short. So Greer.
You've given us 40 years of the history of the leader. How do you think he would have related to what's happening now between the hostages?
Thank you.
And Hamas?
That's a short question.
Next.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Fair enough. Please.
Well, I may say that about 4 hours ago, I printed a post in my Facebook site, and you can read it there. Not in his name, in my name.
No spoilers. You can check out what Benny thought on Facebook. Jeff.
So we hear a lot about your father's relationship with President Carter, but relatively little about his relationship with Brzezinski. Could you talk to us a little bit about what went on with Brzezinski at Camp David? We hear about pressure being applied, true, untrue?
I didn't say that, but maybe I'll have to say now. I was not present at the Camp David resort. I knew almost nothing about it. And I learned very little from my father after it. He was busy, of course, as Prime Minister. I was busy with my petty business in the Geological Survey. So I only remember the picture. Maybe he said something about it, about the chess game that Brzezinski invited him to, as I read later, in order to let Menachem Begin win the game and please him, so he will develop a more positive mood towards the negotiators. But I really don't know. Was short enough?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. It's short.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm intrigued by the concept of confederation with Jordan, and that's quite a move. Did you know more about where it started in his mind and how it developed over time?
I think we're gonna, no, I don't, but at least we can bracket it. Okay, it appeared overtly, expressly in his speech in Har Herzl in 1981. We also know, I didn't want to dwell on it, that somewhere in the mid-70s, the Herut Party relinquished on its stationery the emblem of the two banks. So the realization that this ideology is not readily or cannot be readily in the foreseeable future, cannot be applied, I think can be bracketed among there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you finished the talk at 1979, but I don't think it's much of an appropriate conclusion without mentioning, if you're talking about failed wars, about the first Lebanon war, in which, I'm sure Arik Sharon himself said that the lack of political solution to the Palestinian problem in '79 specifically brought us to the point where we went on this war to defeat the PLO in Lebanon. If you're talking about failed wars and you're talking about Mr. Begin saying, he doesn't want pointless wars, I'm finding it a little difficult to put the two together.
I can hardly see the contradiction. What do you mean to say that the alternative would be to instill a PLO-led a PLO state as demanded at the time, even by Mr. Carter, and to establish it in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. We had a later experience between 1993 and 2000, actually, and 5. As a result, we have an experience. So, and it was not solved until today with different governments. Who can solve it in the way that, I don't know, what you had in mind when you asked it? No? On the other hand, you could say, with all difficulties, the PLO army, headed by Yasser Arafat, the great Nobel Peace Prize laureate, was expelled from Lebanon. And they were expelled to Tunisia. And some leadership brought them back from Tunisia into the western part of Israel and afforded them an autonomy to the area in the 6, I think, cities through the Oslo Agreement. So you have the experience. Once you move even a little bit from the Camp David parameters, security rests within the state of Israel. And we are not going to deposit this with others, PLO or others. And therefore I think that we can learn. It was, and the Camp David Accords and the Camp David construct was very constructive from that point of view, and the destructive other plans brought about bloodshed on both sides.
Okay. Okay. Wait. Yeah.
Do you think that your father and Jimmy Carter appreciated the risks that Anwar Sadat was taking in doing what he did, coming to Israel and signing this treaty?
I don't know. That's the plain answer. I don't know. I know, well known, that Prime Minister Begin was really shocked by the by that murder, and was very moved. He went to the funeral.
Yes, I remember.
Both my parents struck a nice relationship with the widow, with Mrs. Sadat for some years, and but in advance I don't know. Actually, it was Mrs. Sadat who warned him, warned Mr. Sadat. She didn't even want him to get to Jerusalem, but in Jerusalem nothing happened. In Cairo, it did. So, but no, I don't remember anything for a fact.
Last one. Moshe had his hand up for a while, and then if people have other questions, maybe Benny will be around for people to.
Okay, I'm still here.
Moshe.
Anything to the Oslo agreements?
I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing.
Me too.
Okay. So just raise your voice. Don't be bashful.
I can repeat it, Moshe.
Shout at me. Okay.
You are wondering about the relationship between what happened at Camp David and what happened at Oslo, the Oslo agreements. Whether this was a precedent.
The answer to my
Not at all.
And because you have a lot of contradictions, illusions, things were very vague, questions about sovereignty, questions about self-determination,
Okay,
which are just, they emerged.
Okay. I
and are still with us today, and that's the problem. Sleep on.
I served in the Knesset in 1993. I heard the claims, as I told you, well, this is actually, the Camp David Accords even improved. So I propose, if I remember all of them, 3 parameters. A, autonomy to the inhabitants. Instead, in Oslo, autonomy to the area. That is, the PLO governs the area. And the result was, the immediate result, that these areas, as we expected, turned into safe havens for terrorism. That could not be allowed, was not allowed, could not happen under Camp David. The autonomy is for the inhabitant. B, responsibility for security and public order remains in the hands of Israel, and not given away or given on the giveaway table to those hoodlums. No, and so we can see the difference, and the results are there, not before our eyes. The results lie on the ground. Who can reasonably claim that we have a president, of course. No, you look at the facts logically and not with ill faith, then you reach, I think, the conclusion. It was total aberration. It was, as I told you, to be an administrative council. And they turned it into a parliament and a government and ambassadors, and then they run to the JCC and file complaints because they are recognized as a state. No. with all, no. I think it's even an ugly attempt to find an alibi. Maybe that's the reason they didn't feel that good about it themselves, so they had to lean on wider shoulders. No, it's not. It's against the facts.
Okay, thank you very much, Benny Begin. You've all learned a great deal. We have next Thursday, not this Thursday, Thursday next week, the 3rd of April, book launch by Melanie Phillips. You can find details on our website, Facebook page. Email me, Paul.